to even put on my microphone. Sorry.
You don't even have on the microphone.
Check 1, 2. We're on this eclipse stuff is driving me crazy.
There you go.
Mercury's in retrograde.
Yeah, we'll blame it on the Mercury and the eclipse, right?
They don't even use Mercury anymore in the thermostats, do they?
Oh,
thermometers?
You're going that Mercury.
I know. I like to put a spin on things. Hi, everybody.
How's it going?
We're here. Somebody said something about the eclipse happening. Casey suggested we talk about the eclipse, so that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. Might as well talk about the eclipse.
And you were wondering, how do you weave synergy and collaboration into the eclipse?
Not sure. It looks like, hold on.
Oh, is it dirty again?
Yeah, let's have them see us better. Look at that. Oh, it's better.
That's because I put my greasy little mitts all over it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's all right. But now you can see us better.
Well, we always like to talk about focus.
Right.
You ever remember Woody Allen? He did a movie and he was out of focus. I don't remember what movie it was.
Yes.
I'm not out of focus. You're out of focus.
Woody Allen
What do you mean
had
I'm out of
some
focus?
weird movies. Yeah, his movies are very strange.
That one was. Anyways, so we got to focus on the eclipse. We're going to talk about that.
Right.
I wish there was somebody here that was commenting and they could say they were interested or not.
Right. We don't have live viewers. Most of the time they watch it after the fact. And in fact, I think we should extract the audio at some point and just post the audio so people just hear it too.
You mean do a like an Apple podcast thingy?
Yeah, just extract the audio.
Because StreamYard does have the ability to do that. It does split it so you can just do audio.
Yeah. Yeah, we should think about doing that sometime.
I don't have a podcast channel.
Oh, that's okay. You post it on your website. We send people the website.
And they just listen to it on their
their
car.
Yeah.
Or when they're having their Sunday morning cafe.
Yeah, they just go press play and they can listen to it.
How boring is that? You got to look at us. Got to see us.
But you can do it while you're driving, though.
I got driving to do.
Rather than watching. Because, if you're watching us while you're driving, you're probably not being a very safe driver.
Okay, that's an interesting topic. So we're not even on our topic of the eclipse. But if you look at it from that, it's an hour-long program. So if you're going to be driving somewhere, you need to be going at least an hour somewhere.
Either that or they listen to it for half an hour on the way there and a half an hour on the way back.
So they pause it. So it could be a 30-minute drive.
So it's a two-parter for them.
Make it happen.
So eclipse. Yeah. So this eclipse today, what was it? I think they said it was 75% here in Minneapolis. And we were able to see it brilliantly behind the clouds.
But it didn't get that dark.
That's because it was only 75%. It did get dark, but not that dark.
I didn't really notice it.
I did. I was watching. I was paying attention. I did some meditation right around that time frame, which we were talking about just beforehand.
Well, it got dark because you closed your eyes.
No. I opened up the window and I opened up the actual window. So my blinds were open. I normally have like those blinds that are full blackout blinds. So they shut out all the light. I bought them back in the day whenever we used to work nights, so I had to sleep during the day.
Mm-hmm.
So they block out like all the light. But
so they're like eclipse curtains.
Yeah, there you
go. That's actually a brand
of curtain. They eclipse the sun.
I think that's a brand of blackout curtains. It's called Eclipse.
Oh, nice.
So were you wondering how the eclipse is going to work with synergy?
Other than the fact that all the planets were in line. Did you read about that?
No, I didn't read about none of it.
Okay.
I'm totally out of it. Casey's got to fill me in.
It's like 7 planets were all in line. It wasn't just an eclipse. So moon and sun was in line. And then there was, what was it? Mercury, Mars, I think it was Jupiter. And so but there was 7 of the 9 planets. Well, 8 if you consider that Pluto got degraded to a dwarf planet, but I don't care.
It's still gravity.
A planet as far as I'm concerned. So you got your 8.5 planets, whatever they want to call it, that are out there, and 7 of them were in line with the sun and the moon and the devil comet was passing close to the planet at the same time and was actually visible during the same time span in places where the eclipse was at its max.
This guy knows a lot of stuff.
So yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of been plastered all over the news.
I haven't
lately.
really been watching it. I mean, to me, it's just a thing, and I don't really feel anything. I believe that you can feel it if you really, really focus on it, because if we're like a high percentage of water in our body, and the
Yeah.
moon affects the water in the oceans, the tides and all that, does make sense.
Well, I definitely was feeling it, and my wife has been feeling it for days. She's been like, "Oh my God, it feels like so chaotic. There's so much chaotic energy going on right now." And that's just the way that she was feeling about it. And in the places where the eclipse is actually at its max, they were talking about it on the news, how classically, whenever there's a full eclipse going on, the birds even start making weird sounds, and the animals will start making weird sounds. So that's why I opened up my window. I'm like, I'm listening for those weird sounds, and there was none because we're too close to the cities here. So I didn't hear any weird sounds. I was hoping.
Well, didn't it travel from like New York to Austin, Texas? Wasn't that
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, in an arc. So it did kind of an arc along that.
because I looked it up.
It was like a 2 or 3 degree bend.
I looked that up on the internet, and it showed the different cities. And then what I did for this on LinkedIn, I went into my groups and I checked location. So I checked Rochester, New York, and Buffalo, New York, and all the way down the line to Austin, Texas, and invited my connections from that to see this, because they were mostly impacted by the eclipse.
Yeah.
So maybe they might see this on LinkedIn and might matter to them.
Have you ever seen a total eclipse before?
No.
Okay. I got to see one whenever I was a kid. So of course this was
Whenever
like 20,
you were a kid?
When I was a kid, yes. So when I was a kid, so we're talking like, what was it, 20, I think it was like 24 to 26 years ago, somewhere right in there. I'd have to look up
How
when it
often do
was.
total eclipses happen?
In North America, like every 25 years, 24 to 26 years.
I think I
somewhere right in there.
remember seeing one, because we did a thing with a piece of paper and something, and then you watch the little, you don't stare at the thing because then you go blind.
Yeah.
You just took a piece of paper and you got a little pinhole through it and you shined it on there and you saw the thing.
Well, I was lucky enough last time whenever it passed across North American path, it actually was full in Los Angeles. So it actually was a full eclipse in LA where I was. So so I went to Griffith Park Observatory, which is a famous observatory there for anybody who doesn't know.
I've been there.
And since we went to Griffith Park Observatory for the day, they literally had a whole bunch of astronomers who were all set up with their special telescopes so they could actually view the whole thing. And some of them had it pointing at the where the eclipse was going to be taking place. Some of them had it pointed at other planets, so that way they could actually see what was going to happen with the other planets at the same time, so they'd be like super visible. Because during that same time frame, I think it was Saturn was also in the day at that time frame. I think it was Saturn. I can't remember. But the guy had on the telescope, so that way as soon as the eclipse happened, it was dark enough. He was like, yeah, you can actually see the rings at the same time. And he had 2 telescopes. And one of them, when he was going to take pictures of the rings, it was like that or Jupiter.
I wonder what all that stuff does to the flat earther people. When you have all these dimensions beyond 2 with Saturn and stuff. I wonder if it screws up their theory.
I don't think anything screws up. Science doesn't screw up their theory. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, flat earthing theories are like, they're crazy. They're like, oh, you can't see the bend of the earth. And there's literally, you can go watch the videos of this on YouTube. As somebody who lived along the coast, I used to watch, you see the boats and they dip below the horizon all the time. Like, you hear about how Columbus got one of his ideas from doing that. And so we would set up telescopes and we'd actually watch as the sailboats would go dip below the horizon. And it's very normal. You can see that. And so there was this guy who at this extremely wide point of the river in, I think it was in Canada, probably up by like Rimouski or somewhere like that. But anyhow, so it was like right across the way. And then he had a telescope set up, and then he had his camera on the telescope. So he's like recording it the whole time. And he's like, all right. And the guy went out in a helicopter and he flew out, and he was like, they flew to like a certain amount of feet above sea level. And then he was like, okay, so I'm at this many feet above sea level. And then they went, okay. And then he flew over to the other side. And then he said, okay, so now I'm going to fly over there and I'm going to be up high. And then I'm going to drop down. And then whenever you disappear, you'll see like how many feet it is above sea level. And so they go like they're going to land, and they go all the way down so they can't see anymore. And in theory, if it's flat, you should be able to see them all the way until it lands. But of course, the Earth isn't flat. So when they start to go down, it stops. And I think the guy was like 120 feet above sea level still at the point where he dipped below the horizon. So yeah, it was interesting. So like he's like, I'm not even close to the ground yet.
Well, yeah, the flat Earth thing doesn't work for me when you look at the other things out there.
You even have to take account, like if you're into if you're into sport shooting, right? And you're into like extreme sport shooting where you're like, shooting extremely long distances or anything like that. One of the calculations you have to take into account is bullet drop, curve of the Earth, and the spin of the Earth. Those are things that you have to take into account, and those are all things that debunk flat Earth theory. Right. And if you don't take those things into account, you don't hit your target.
That's an interesting thing, that calculation that if you drop a bullet and shoot the bullet, they both hit the ground at the same time.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
That's kind of bizarre that short distance from the gun to the ground is like 3 feet, and then that's like thousands,
right?
And they still hit at the same time. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah,
physics. Anyways, I just was thinking about the eclipse thing. How did flat earthers think about that?
Well, technically, they don't hit it exactly the same time, but yes, because it's not going to hit it exactly the same time because your bullet's being shot straight and you're on a curve. So you fire here, and it's got further to go to hit the ground over here.
Right.
So it goes beyond like
it's even different on Jupiter.
yeah, but that's why you have to account for the curve of the Earth. So
yes, you do.
Yeah,
it ends up being one of those things where it's close enough for practical purposes.
Right. It is, unless you're getting into the extreme distances. But with those extreme distances, the only things that really have to worry about those super extreme distances are like battleships stuff. Like you'd have to be like in the crow's nest of a.
Well, nowadays they don't even have to worry about it because the stuff is all radio controlled and all that, where you could shoot it from anywhere and it'll arrive at a determined time on a Tuesday at 2:15 a.m.
So they have railgun ships now, railgun battleships.
Railgun
battleships can shoot like freaking far, and it's ballistic. It's not, they don't have wings on them, so they can't pilot it after it fires. And they use old school trajectories and stuff, and they use tungsten rounds whenever they fire these things. So not all of them use tungsten rounds, but that's like one of the things that they use. Well, if you fire them with a tungsten round out of these giant, huge machines, right? They fire them and they can hit with kinetic force equivalent to like a 1 megaton nuclear blast. Like, I mean, it's just It's immense, the huge immense force that they can fire with, and they can fire really far too. So whenever they fire, they actually use old school like trajectories as a backup. They still have them, so they can crank to fire them off. It's really cool. So they actually they do all of those calculations. But the other thing is they have to count for the pitch and roll.
Yeah, in the wind
Yeah, it's so crazy.
and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't like guns.
It's fascinating how
and
they can
war.
hit something that far though. Like, back in, this is back in the Korean War, right? So they were so accurate. If you were to give them the exact coordinates, like down to like feet, the coordinates, they were pretty much accurate enough that they could hit a house. Like it wasn't accurate enough that you could hit a man standing there for sure, but they were accurate enough back during that time frame with all the manual, everything that they did, that they could hit a house.
Yeah, my brother was in the Army and he was trained on the TOW missile, two launched optically tracked and wire guided.
Wow.
Or two launched wire guided and optically tracked. I guess that's what it's actually guided by wires. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, that's our military complex.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I was reading another weird thing about, synergy and the Eclipse, to go back to the Eclipse.
Yeah.
So I was reading about how they were talking specifically about clean energy methods and the clean energy methods that they have and how they were affected by the eclipse. And they were like, the eclipse is going to wreak havoc on all our clean energy methods. Because, like, in the path of where it all went. Because basically, it gets dark, so solar doesn't work, right?
Mhm.
It stops producing for that period of time. I mean,
That's
it's only a
one.
short period of time, but it stops producing.
Yeah.
It affects the temperature, right? So if you have a total eclipse, it drops the temperature temporarily.
Mm-hmm.
It also affects the weather because since it changes the temperature of the atmosphere, that's pretty interesting. So it actually changes the wind.
Sure.
So that's kind of interesting. In fact, I recall at the Griffith Park Observatory whenever it happens, like, because it's on the crest of a hill, I recall it being eerily quiet. It felt very still whenever
Probably
the eclipse
because
was happening.
people were there watching and they're really captivated by watching it.
But it also felt like the wind stopped for a couple of minutes.
Sure, I can believe that.
Yeah.
Because of the change in temperature and stuff.
Yeah, it was really interesting. The other thing that I remember is at the point where we were able to look with the naked eye, right? And you were able to take off the glasses or not look through the scope or any of whatever, right? For that period of time. It was fascinating because I remember being able to see I guess it would be called solar wind, but it's the not the stratosphere of the sun, but it's the photosphere of the sun. You can actually see the rippling coming off of the sun. It's pretty cool. Like, it's not something you can see normally, but I was like, whoa, okay, that's pretty cool.
And you were straight? He's not saying.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure if I got what you meant there.
Still not saying. That's okay. I think we just shifted topics again.
I'm like, what?
Well, you start seeing stuff. You start, what would you call them? Hallucinating or
Oh, I see what you were
psychedelic
asking.
influence?
I hear what you were asking. No,
you weren't
absolutely
thinking like-
not. No, I was a kid at the time.
Well, when I said straight, you weren't thinking gay, right?
I was like, what does sexual orientation have to do with anything?
There you go. That's why you got quiet. I thought maybe you were concerned about your, I don't want people to know that I deal in psilocybin stuff.
Oh no, like everybody.
Oh, I
can know
shouldn't have
that.
said deal because they're going to misinterpret.
Yeah, no
that too.
deal. No
Deal or no deal.
Right. If
Work
somebody
with.
wants to go find it and discover it on their own, growing in the middle of a forest, I'm good with that.
So this would be a commercial interruption that Casey helps people understand that stuff.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people exploring it now, and it's good to do it with somebody that knows what they're talking about, as opposed to just going, "Hey, I can help you out."
Or just ask questions.
Yeah, that's it.
That's actually I
That's
get
right.
that more than anything else. People are just like, hey, I'm curious about this. I really want to know what's safe, what's not safe. Is there anything I should know before doing it? Like, I get those questions a lot. And there's people out there who think that they understand it. And, just because they've done it a couple times whenever they're a kid. And there's a big difference between, hey, I was like at a concert and decided to eat a few mushrooms while I was at a concert versus trying to have a spiritual experience. It's, they're a far cry from one another.
I was on a Reddit platform, and there's one they were talking about ayahuasca, and someone was talking about manufactured ayahuasca, so synthetic, I guess you might call it. And they're saying, like, what's the difference? You think there's a difference? And I said, I think there is, because one is not nature, it's not natural, so it's a different kind of thing. And I don't agree with the chemically created stuff.
It's not really chemically created. So DMT is not commonly synthesized as it is extracted. So typically they extract it. And same thing with the MAOIs. Like, there are synthetic MAOIs that people take that are out there, because that's, usually the cappy. That's usually what the cappy vine is used for.
He knows a lot of stuff about this, because I've read this stuff, and you're using all these words, this language that I'm not familiar with, but I remember seeing those words. So
yeah,
he knows what he's talking about, because I saw it written somewhere.
Yeah, but so the MAOI, that's mono amine MAOI, monoamino oxidase inhibitor. I think that's what it is. It's a really long word, but basically what it does is it causes your body to not break down certain chemicals. So whenever you take the DMT, it actually stays in your system for a long time. Otherwise, our system is used to dealing with DMT. Like, DMT is found a lot in nature and in our bodies, and it's one of those things that it's not a big deal. So we break it down really fast. So without the MAOI, you have to take massive load of it in order to be able to have an experience. So whenever you put it together like that, what I have experienced with straight up DMT versus ayahuasca is that DMT is because it's so short lived, you spend most of that time trying to put your head into that space. It's almost like, it's weird. So there's this moment that's like pulling your head out of your ass. I mean, that's really the best way to explain it, because there's this moment at where everything starts to get really loud. You start to hear this, and all of a sudden it goes, and then it's like you are in a different realm. Everything is just different. And then you feel immensely sober, and yet you're not at all. And that's actually the point where I warn people that's the point where you can almost be in danger of doing something stupid, because you feel like you're straight until you start seeing things. And you're opening your eye and you're looking, you have your eyes wide open and you're looking around, and you are realizing that you can, even though you feel straight, you're seeing beings or geometric patterns, and it's like you can see time. It's really weird.
Are you
It's
still
a very
talking
weird
about
space.
the ayahuasca?
The
stuff?
DMT portion of it, yeah.
Okay.
If you're doing the straight DMT, but it all happens so fast that you're spending all that time getting into the space and then all the time getting out of the space, and it's all confusing because it happens to you very short period of time. We're talking 15 to 20 minutes if you're doing straight DMT. Now, if you take an MAOI with it, say Syrian Rue, which is a common one that people do because that one is That one is more legal and therefore easier to get. And you take the Syrian rue and then you do DMT, right? Which is synthetic ayahuasca is the way they would say it. It's not really synthetic. As I said, it's all just extracted. And if you were to do that, you take the Syrian rue and then you follow it by doing the DMT.
Too,
and boom, it's going to launch you out there. But the difference is that as you get launched into that space, it's almost like everything slows down a little bit. You get to that space easier, and then you stay in that space for a while. And it makes it easier to handle. There's less confusion. There's less of that danger moment where you feel like you're going to freak out. And then whenever it drops off, you don't just suddenly go, ooh, okay, I'm like landing. Oh, ooh, okay, what just happened? You know, it's so there's less confusion involved in the whole thing. And since everything's slowed way down, it's much easier to actually integrate and get something out of what you saw. So the experience is very different. Then ayahuasca just has all that built in. So I think it's different. I think based on my experience, I actually do think you do get something different, because I think whenever you're doing those extractions and everything, you're missing a lot of the spirit of the plant.
That's my point.
Which is what you're about to say?
Yeah. So that, because when you say different, is there one that is better than the other? Yes or no? Because good and bad is actually a perception.
Yeah.
But
I think they're both effective.
Like when someone is extracting, they're in a lab extracting.
It's not a lab environment necessarily.
Well,
it's more like cooking.
Okay. Well.
Yeah, with this particular aspect of things, it's more like cooking. Which you cook ayahuasca too.
Sure. But I mean, what's the intention when you're making the ayahuasca in the jungle for some people that are looking for spiritual healing versus somebody that's in there and they're measuring shit, trying to figure things out? What's their intention?
Nobody's making DMT to be like, oh, people are going to have fun on this. I don't know of anybody who does that. Like,
well, why are they doing
I
it?
do know some people who have theoretically made DMT at some point. I'm saying it like that on purpose. And all of them are doing it for very spiritual purposes. I know a few people who are more psychonauts that do it, which psychonauts are people who are just really into psychedelics and they believe that we're learning a lot about the human psyche while they're doing it, which is kind of a little bit different than the way that, say, an ayahuasquera would do it, or a curandero, because, you know, whenever they're doing it, they're doing it for a similar purpose, but instead of the human psyche as more of a mental thing, they're doing it as the spirit. They're actually trying to delve into the nature of the universe itself.
I guess it's kind of what I
chemistry.
Prefer. It's a preference thing. But if you look at it, like you mentioned cooking, there's some restaurants where they crack a couple eggs and they sprinkle some of this on here and they stir this up and then they taste it and then they take some of that and put some of that in there. Then there's other restaurants that take the thing and they put it in a little cup and they put it on a little scale and they dial it in and go, okay, it's 32.4 grams. And then they're all very precise about it.
Yeah.
I would rather eat at the place that's throwing shit around than got that different thing going on.
A place that feels more like Buca de Beppo, huh?
I guess, yeah.
Yeah.
Rather than some place that, you can't use any more of that because this is what corporate says.
Well, sometimes you get that precise because it's food science and you're trying to get a certain specific texture. And so, you know, if you added too much of that, it's going to be more slimy instead of frothy. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, because there is something to be said for precision and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know. I just like
it's an art when you toss things around.
There's going out in the woods and looking at the trees and seeing the water flow down the river and the creek. Mm-hmm. And then there's going downtown Minneapolis and seeing the architecture with the perfect lines and all that stuff. So there's different appreciation for it.
Absolutely. What I have found, though, to answer the exact question through my own experiences, reading trip reports and all kinds of stuff like that, that DMT versus ayahuasca is a matter of dose. So what people typically do with DMT is an extremely large dose. What they typically do with ayahuasca is a low to medium dose. Now, there are some places that do big doses, but typically it's about an ounce, ounce and a half that somebody drinks
Let
of the
me ask you this:
ayahuasca.
is that relevant to body weight,
I think it is.
like alcohol is?
It is with psilocybin. It's totally relevant to body weight with psilocybin. With DMT, it's a little bit more tricky with the ayahuasca, and specifically because there's an MAOI involved, and the MAOI prevents your body from being able to break it down. So if it prevents your body from breaking it down, then you don't the body weight doesn't come into effect as much, because part of what you're measuring with body weight is the size of the organ and how much fluid you're flushing through your liver at any given time, because the liver enzymes are actually what begin to break a lot of this stuff down. So it gets a little bit more confusing when you get into that.
Yeah,
And
and I
I think
think
there's probably a scientific method to actually to do that. And in fact, when they're putting people on these, which we've talked about like 2 or 3 times before, where they're doing like those studies in Europe, and they're actually trying to map the DMT space with, they started, like, some of those people started by experimenting with ayahuasca, but what they ended up doing in the long run, so that way they can get people in exactly the same space, they ended up putting it into a drip. So they have DMT, they put they put it intravenously, and then they do a drip that goes directly into your bloodstream and is an exact precise dose. And so that way they can hold you at exactly that space.
these conversations are kind of fun because as he's talking about all these things, my mind is racing with all sorts of different ideas and things. And I started thinking about like the dose stuff. With alcohol, it's relevant to body weight. You got some, petite little person versus like a Hulk Hogan kind
Yeah.
of person. The alcohol is going to affect them differently.
Alcohol is going to affect them definitely different because, well, they have a bigger liver if they're larger, right? So their liver is actually able to move and pass more fluids through them. B, fat cells change how your body processes things. So how much fat you have in your system. Also, did you eat first? Because that'll actually change the blood flow to the stomach, and it changes how much everything else was working on.
And
So
then
yeah,
once
there's a
that
lot of things
stuff does get
changes.
through, then it goes into the brain, and there's those neurological connections with the whatever the dealy bop in between there. There's some people have more of them than others, perhaps.
Receptors, yeah.
And then does the size of the receptor matter?
You're getting into territory that's actually very theoretical. We don't actually, so this is the long and short of it. People have theories about how these drugs work. They have theories about what's going on with these drugs based on the chemical nature of these drugs. We actually don't know. That's the long and short of it, is we don't know how these things work. It's actually really fascinating because a lot of people talk about the science of it out there, but they talk about the science of it like somehow it's like gravity, and we know exactly how it works. But frankly, we don't know how gravity works. We don't actually understand, because gravity, Newton's laws break down as soon as you get into quantum physics. You're like, oh, and it doesn't matter whether it's large or small or everything else. It's like, oh, it doesn't matter anymore. It broke down. It doesn't work. The math doesn't work anymore.
I know, 'cause when we're on a different topic now with the whole gravity thing. How does gravity affect people on the North and South Pole versus somebody on the equator where you've got centrifugal force? Because you don't have centrifugal force on the North and South Pole.
Well, gravity is created by mass, so I don't know if it actually affects you any different.
Well, you got the guy in the merry-go-round and the thing is spinning around. The guy in the middle isn't being affected as much as the guy on the outside.
But there's nobody in the middle.
But
I get what you mean, because it's
but
more
the North
still.
and South Pole are on the axis, whereas on the equator they're on the outside.
So you're actually spinning faster. I get that, but we're on such a large object that to us we're just standing still. Like, it's no different to us. We might as well be fleas on a dog wagging its tail. The dog can't get rid of the fleas by wagging its tail.
Well, you think that the people on the equator are taller than the people on the North and South Pole because centrifugal force is pulling them out. You're saying it's insignificant?
That's well, I don't.
Because there's quite a significance with the
There
distance
is?
of the sun from the equator versus the poles.
There's also a difference in the way that the Earth is, because the Earth is not really flat because it spins the way that it does. It actually kind of goes widens a little bit. So it totally, yeah. I mean, everything affects us, but I'm not sure. Like, I don't think any of us live far enough up towards the North Pole that we would be able to.
Santa Claus, I wonder if he's ever done Aya.
Santa Claus. Okay, so I think that the discovery of Santa Claus had to come due to an ayahuasca trip or a mushroom trip.
And
one
why
or the
isn't
other.
why isn't there an Anta Claus on the South Pole?
The language doesn't fit there. That's why.
An anti-Santa.
Well, there is an anti-Santa.
Who's that?
That's Krampus.
I don't know about that.
You've never heard the Krampus story?
Where is the down the South Pole?
No, he doesn't live in the South Pole.
Should be if it's really the other side.
He's
Santa's on the North Pole.
Yeah, he's the opposite. He comes around during Christmas time, and he's the opposite of Santa Claus. Santa Claus basically gives gifts to everybody.
Oh,
right?
The porch pirates from Amazon. We're stealing gifts instead of giving them?
No, he steals kids and beats them.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah, so the bad kids, he goes around and he steals the kids and he beats them. And his name is Krampus, and it's a real story. It actually predates.
That sounds like a conspiracy
It
theory.
predates Santa Claus. The story about Krampus. It's like a modernly they look at it as though he's a demon creature, but actually classically he was seen as this it was a goat-like creature is the way they talk about him, but he would come around. Yeah, he would go around, and then all of the kids that were really, really awful to everybody throughout the year, he would steal them, and then he would basically beat them and then let them go after the holidays. Or sometimes if they were really awful, they're super, super bad people, he would eat them. Yeah. So that was Krampus is a really bizarre, weird story. And it actually, like I said, it predates Santa Claus. It goes back really far.
So we haven't talked much about the eclipse or synergy or collaboration.
We did a little bit.
We did a little bit, but it's interesting where this is going, because now we're talking about the ayahuasca situation. When someone has the knowledge like you've got of all these different entities and archetypes and all these different things, you must have a different kind of experience than someone that doesn't know that stuff. That someone is just knows about math and they know how to speak English and they work construction all their life pounding nails.
I think part of the reason why I'm so fascinated with psychedelics the way that I am is because I do experience them differently. I talk with people about the way that they experience psychedelics. Like, for example, like I don't have strong visuals on LSD. Never have. And I mean, I haven't done LSD in many, many years, but yeah, so back in the day, whenever I used to, do that particular one.
Back when you're a Hollywood hippie?
That's right. Whenever I was a Hollywood hippie.
Those days are gone, folks.
Yeah, so.
It's 7 years ago, at least.
At least, yeah. It's outside of the statute of limitations.
I'm glad you picked up on that.
Yeah, so it was, yeah, basically, like, I never had really strong visuals. I would get the effect where, like, the wall was wet. That's like a pretty normal one that people get. I did get that. And once in a while, I would get the weird thing where it would look like letters would run around on a page while you were trying to read them. So, but that's like, that can be explained by dyslexia. You know what I mean? So
No, I don't.
people,
They actually move.
well, people who are dyslexic, sometimes they can experience the words on the page falling off the edge of the paper.
I didn't know that. I thought they're just mixed up.
Sometimes they appear backwards. Sometimes they're mixed up. I mean,
Now it kind of reminds me of going to the movie when you see the hot dog and the popcorn dancing around. Let's all go to the movie, and you see all the letters running around.
yeah. And that's some people experience dyslexia like that, where it's like things running around. But on LSD, so they have this test that they give people whenever you have dementia. There we go. I'm like, it starts with a D. What's that word? Dementia. So whenever you're having dementia, and yeah. So when you are coming down with something like dementia, one of the things that they will do is they will have you do a test. This test is simple. They have you draw a clock. I mean, not a digital clock, an old analog clock. So it requires a certain part of the brain to do it. That part of the brain is the part of the brain that actually gets affected. Now, when you are on a significant amount of psychedelic, you cannot do that. You will draw the clock very weird. And I tested people on it in order to find out.
So it looks like one of those, I can't remember who the artist is with the clock that's melting.
Yes. It does sometimes. Sometimes it looks like that. Sometimes you'll put the circle over here and then the lines will be like over here. Or sometimes you'll do like, it won't be a circle. It'll be like this weird like oval-like things. And you'll put lines that just kind of just are, they're not in the center.
So in
your
experience, has that happened with other objects other than a clock? Has someone tried to draw a pumpkin or a basketball?
Yeah, I can't remember what the effect is called. I would have to look it up again. It's on the tip of my tongue, but I just can't remember the name right this second.
The
But
tongue.
The tip on tongue. But anyhow, so yeah, so the drawing of the clock. That was the whole point that I was saying that is that if you can't draw a clock, then you are heavily affected. That's like one of the tests to see how heavily affected you are is, can you draw a clock? And that's actually, if you are watching somebody or sitting for somebody and they're like trying to tell you that they're like, oh, I'm fine, I'm totally sober. You're like, yeah, right, here, draw a clock. Like really, have them draw a clock. So because then you can look at the clock, you can look at the clock and go, yeah, there's no way you're sober, try and draw a clock for me. And they will draw a clock and they will think the clock is totally fine. And you'll be like, yeah, that's not fine. And if they draw a clock and it's perfectly fine, does not mean that they're sober. It just means that they're maybe not as far as you were hoping to get them. So, but yeah, the point of it was that we were talking, you asked me a question. So the question we were talking about, I forgot the question. But the point was is that whenever we were talking about, because you were asking about, yeah, we were talking about the LSD.
The size of people's neurons and stuff.
Yes.
And it was all a big myth.
So I find that everybody gets to that stage. It doesn't really matter. Like you can give, if you give somebody, you know, a certain amount of psychedelics, like they're going to get to that stage. And we were talking about, yeah, because that was before this particular stage of the topic. But yeah, we were talking about, you know, if you're taking an MAOI, it takes you much less to get there. So
fascinating.
But I can't remember what the question was that sent me off on that particular thing, talking about the clocks. Because there was a point to it, but I lost it. I lost it because I was describing it.
Well, I find it interesting because you said you have someone draw a clock, but draw an analog clock, not a digital clock.
Yeah, you're not just writing words in a box. I mean, the letters.
How do you draw
numbers in a box?
Digital clock?
Put a box, rectangle, and then you write numbers. You put two numbers, dots, two numbers.
That's interesting because you can't really draw a digital. Well, you can.
I could draw a digital clock.
This is even an interesting topic because if you take a clock and you don't have to put the numbers on it, you can just put the hands on it and you can kind of figure it out.
You can, yes, with the
With
clock,
a
you can
digital
figure it
clock,
out.
you can't.
Yeah,
You have to put the numbers on it.
you have to put the numbers on it.
If you don't put the numbers on it, the options are endless.
Like I don't even have to like if you have no dots, no anything on a digital clock, and as long as I know which way is north on that clock, so which way is up on that clock, so where the 12 o'clock is, as long as I know where the 12 o'clock is as a reference, I can tell what time it is.
If you've got time after this, we'll talk about some magic tricks that use digital clocks and analog clocks that you might find interesting.
Oh yeah, absolutely, that would be fun.
So we got another 15 minutes, folks.
15 minutes.
This has been intense. I mean, interesting, not intense.
Yeah, I thought my wife was going to show up 15 minutes ago. She was like, "Oh yeah, I'll show up and maybe maybe I'll just jump in on your conversation for a little while."
Time's not up yet.
Yep, exactly.
Only the shadow knows. But I like going down these rabbit holes because my brain ends up, I'm sort of like a contraire kind of. Some will say this is the way it is, but then how about this?
That was the question. You were asking me how I perceive it versus other people perceive it. And do I perceive it differently because of my heavy amount of understanding?
Yes.
I think I have a heavy amount of understanding because I became fascinated by it because I see it differently than a lot of other people.
The chicken and the egg kind of thing?
I think so. Because I don't experience hallucinogens exactly like other people experience them. I've never had a full ego death on it. Like a lot of people talk about full ego death. Trust me, like I should have. I definitely have had moments where I should have experienced an ego death. And
clarify what ego death is.
Dissolution of self. You're so far out there that you cease to exist. Like your ego is irrelevant. You are just part of the universe.
So it's sort of an out of body type experience, maybe like that situation I had in Bali where I was an orb almost.
I would say that was not an ego death thing. That was more like an out of space, out of time type thing. Like you were definitely, that was an out of body type experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas what I'm talking about is it's ego death. Like, I mean, really, there's no other way to explain it. I mean, psychedelics and heavy meditation are the only two things I've ever heard of that can actually produce it. And essentially what happens is you become so one with the universe that you cease to exist. You stop existing. It's you
now,
start.
Is it you stop existing or you omni-exist?
Both.
So it's kind of like I have a saying like if you say, what is God? And I say God is all that is, which includes all that is not.
Yes.
And then your brain starts going, what? How can you do that?
That's a very Zen way of looking at it. I love Zen meditation. Like Zen meditation is my favorite way of doing meditation that actually, makes the mind kind of like question the universe, because you're trying to hold juxtapositions. So if you're holding all that is and all that is not, like that's a juxtaposition that both can't really exist simultaneously, but they have to encompass world. God, right? Because God, another old school term for God, and the old school name, Manu, which means all, and of course God means all, and there's other terms for God throughout time that they've had, and most of the old names for God, really, they're just words that kind of mean universe, or they mean the whole, or all that is, or things, or just all. And the concept, I think, has gotten away from people a lot in modern times. People are constantly trying to prove the existence of God, but really the question is, can you prove the existence of consciousness? Because you can't. You can't prove the existence of consciousness.
Well, it's interesting that atheists want us to prove that there's God, or God people, believers.
I would like them to prove to me that they exist.
I would like you to prove to me that God does not exist.
Right.
Because that's what I was whenever I get into that conversation, they say, prove that God is real. I say, then if God's not real, then what's our topic?
Yeah.
It stops there because the topic is gone now. If there's no God, then we have no topic. So what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about God. Oh, you just spoke the word. Therefore, God must exist.
If the concept of God exists, then God exists. If the concept of God does not exist, then God does not exist.
Well, that's hard.
Our very conceptual
hard,
ideal of it.
That's hard to say that the concept of God doesn't exist. How can you say that?
Right. Because the concept obviously exists because you have to,
He's
you
got done
can't
making
say
it not exist. So therefore it does
Right.
exist, so it can exist.
But
Oh
that
my
goes
God.
back, it goes back to what I was saying about consciousness. Like, they can't even understand consciousness right now. They don't understand consciousness. They believe that consciousness exists, but they can't prove consciousness. You can't prove consciousness. They can't even prove physics.
But you can't disprove consciousness.
Quantum physics disproves physics, and physics disproves quantum physics.
It's like people have said that like God and Jesus, they're made up in your imagination, just like that purple unicorn up in the corner.
Yeah.
That's not really there. I say, you just spoke it, therefore it is. So it is there.
Yeah. It's kind
now
of a
look
weird
what you
thing.
did. So quit thinking of all this weird shit that you don't want to exist. Because now it's here. So
Right.
that's the kind of thing where you run into the omniscient and the. So when you do something like ayahuasca, I don't know yet,
Huh?
but I'll learn someday that you end up being part of all that is, and the whole time space thing is irrelevant because they talk about the universe is infinite and time is infinite.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, what time is it? It doesn't matter. It says 5:52, but it doesn't matter because there's no such.
There's no such thing as time.
There's such a thing as time, but it's our own made up thing because the past
Right.
and the future exist now in present moment. Supposedly everything exists all at the same time.
Right.
Life is weird. I was just thinking about this as you're sharing earlier, that way back before we had all these religions and beliefs of spirituality and all that, way back when man first lit a fire, man was probably thinking, and woman probably hanging there and dragging her out of the cave by her hair because she wouldn't listen. Did I say that? No, I'm going to get in trouble.
That is the second time you've said something that my wife would be like, "Oh my God, did you just say that?"
Just joking.
Oh, I know you are.
So
she knows you are too, but she'd still be laughing at you, going, "What?"
She didn't see it. It's at the end. You got to stick around till the last thing. I should have told him that in the beginning. I'm going to say something that's off color at the very end of this video, so watch it to the end. But they might have been thinking about stuff like that. Like, here I am, I'm not hungry. I just got done eating. I killed that deer and I ate it, and hanging out here talking to, or thinking about stuff. Start thinking like, how did I get here? What's with all these trees and stuff? How did they get here? Must have started thinking about all that shit.
I don't know.
And we're still thinking about it.
I don't know how those thoughts even began though, because I mean, I don't think that there's many animals who think about the nature of their own existence.
How do you know that?
We don't.
My
but
dog,
I don't believe
Kingsley,
that there is.
We're sitting at breakfast and Kingsley just that's what that dog does, just stares at you. You're trying to have breakfast and you look down, staring at you.
It just wants your food.
And then when you stare back, no, even when we're not eating, the dog is just staring at you. Yeah. It's like, I'm trying to tell you something that's really important. You got to listen to me.
That's funny.
And then you stare back really hard, and then kind of he'll turn away a little bit. But then you look away, and all of a sudden he's back looking at you again, staring at you. Dog is very, very, very intense.
That's funny.
It is.
That's pretty funny.
It just stares. So must be thinking about something.
Yeah.
I mean, how could a scientist know that dogs, like for an example, they don't see color?
Mm-hmm.
How do they figure that out? because they show them a blue ball and a red ball, and they respond to the red ball and not the blue ball, or they respond to either ball. Maybe they just go, I don't care if it's red or blue. I just want to chase the ball.
I know how they do it now, and it's actually kind of a little cruel. They use electronics and stuff like that they like hook up to parts. They like take little probes and they'll put it in the neurons, and they just catch the currents going through it, and they just see where the current lights up based on what they're seeing to see whether or not that they see in certain colors. It's how they know that cuttlefish actually see in a much wider spectrum of light than we do. So cuttlefish actually have the best eyes in the entire world as far as light goes. They can see the widest range of spectrum of light.
Are those the ones that have the bone that you use to sand stuff?
The cuttlefish?
A cuttlefish bone?
To sand stuff with?
I thought they were porous and you could use them to like rub the calluses off your feet and stuff. Cuttlefish. I thought parakeets like them or something in their cages, and the parakeets peck on them.
Weird. Okay, interesting.
I might be making this shit up.
I have never heard anything about cuttlefish and bones that you would use.
Well, we'll have to look it up.
That's kind of interesting.
We got another 4 minutes.
There is yeah, so I know that you use a deer bone on horsehide shoes. It's called cordovan. Those types of shoes comes from a very specific part of the back of a specific type of horse. It's called cordovan, and it's a reddish leather. And even if you were to cut the leather, the leather on this particular, the skin on this particular type of horse, you take a fatty deer bone and you bone the shoes. They just call it boning the shoe. And you take the bone and you rub it on the shoe, and the scratches and cuts will come right out of it. They just
But I was in the
folds
Amazon.
itself right back together.
I was in the Amazon jungle on a trip. Not one of those trips, but I was in the Amazon on a vacation.
There you go.
And they had these big scales that came off this fish, and the scales had like little ribs in them, so you could actually use them to file your fingernails.
Oh, weird.
They're real sharp, each scale, and they were selling them at this little store.
Weird.
Big giant round scale from this fish. That was an interesting trip. I went down the Amazon jungle. There's a place where the water is all green from the clay, and then the other side it's all pink from clay. And
wow.
There's dolphin. There's pink ones and green ones. And they would go into the green side. The pink ones would jump in, and the green ones would go on the pink side, and you'd be jumping, and you'd see them.
That's pretty cool.
It was very cool.
That'd be a lot of fun.
We're kind of done.
Yeah, kind of.
Visitors.
Yeah, I think my wife showed up for the very, very, very tail end.
2 minutes.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I think it was funny that, oh, yeah, there's the wife. So
hi.
I think it's very interesting that even though our topic was the eclipse, we only talked about it as a launching off point for other topics. We didn't really talk about it very much.
We just did it for keyword clickbait, anyways. To be honest.
Well, we tried to talk about it a little bit, but I think that there was other more fascinating things to talk about.
Well, it's interesting how the internet works, because what happens with these, for those that don't know, is we take this video and I've got software that chops it up, and then it creates different titles for different things. So all the different topics we had, we're going to have titles. It's interesting to find out what comes out of those 20 videos.
Right.
Cuttlefish.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll find out I'm full of shit.
The nature of consciousness.
The nature of consciousness, synthetic DMT versus natural DMT.
Right. We'll see what pops up.
Okay.
All right. Till next time.
Okay, we could do one of these, right? Boom. Okay, I'm going to sign you off. Remember what I say. Be good, be kind, be nice. Be nice. Damn it. Click. Click.